Welcome to People Lab. I'm Martin, and I'm part of Google's People Operations team, and I spend my time developing leaders at Google. We built the People Lab because it was obvious to us in our years of working with the world's most successful startups that the people challenges were possibly the most difficult ones to overcome. The human factor of the startup was almost as crucial to success or failure as the product. In fact, in one study that surveyed VCs and asked what made funded startups fail, the biggest reason for failure, accounting for 65%, was people-related issues. Conflict among co-founders, can't seem to hire strong talent, can't keep them, can't keep the team motivated to push for near impossible goals. In a more recent study by Harvard Business School, startup founders were asked what the most crucial skills were to be successful. Take a look at this list. People again are a priority. Even the important skill of product management is enveloped in people issues. Anyone that's done product management will tell you it's about making tough prioritization decisions, resolving conflict, getting engineering and growth teams aligned. Bill Coughren, former Google VP and now at Sequoia Capital, put it so well. Engineering is easy, people are hard. The People Lab will focus on three areas. First, scaling the founder. You've come into this work to build an amazing product, and very quickly you'll find that you need to build a team around that work. How should you think about the people factor of the startup? And how should you deal with your own personal struggles with self-confidence or with the real fear of failure? Second, scaling the founding team. Each of you might be A players in your own way, but that doesn't guarantee you will be an A team. Co-founder conflict is the biggest killer of startups, so we'd like to give you some tools to make sure your founding team is strong. Lastly, scaling your people. How do you think about building a culture? How do you deal with employees that can't do the work fast enough or well enough? How do you sharpen your prediction skills when you're hiring people for your startup? How do you organize your team so that they're effective, not pulled down by bureaucracy? As we go, we'll be pulling from our years of experience in dealing with founders from around the world. We'll also be sharing things that work at Google, with the caveat that the Google approach won't work for all contexts. And along the way, we'll be drawing insights from some really rigorous, mind-expanding work done by research in academia who've studied these founders closely in the past decades. Here's a story of a startup team that needs some help. As I tell you about their situation, I'd like you to think about what do you do to help fix the team? So meet Mike, Surya, and Alex. Mike and Surya are university classmates, very close friends, and they decided to co-found. So early on, they were working in different companies and started building the startup at night and on weekends. Very early in the startup, they decided to split the equity 50-50. They went on to create a prototype, got some angel funds to hire developers, and then soon after, they quit their jobs to do this full-time. Then they hire Alex as co-founder and VP of marketing. So let's zoom into Surya. So Surya has 5 fresh grads in his team, and because they're not of the highest caliber, they miss product deadlines, and soon after, he's forced to fire them. He then hires 2 experienced engineers who then leave him after 6 months. They hated working for him. Surya then just keeps on trying, feeling ashamed that he let Mike down. He decides to keep on trying to hire while putting in late hours to work on the app. Over to Mike. So Mike is frustrated with Surya at this point, but doesn't want to add more pressure, so he keeps quiet. But meanwhile, he's getting nervous that it won't work out, so secretly, he does side projects to earn money. Surya soon learns about it and feels like he should be getting more than 50% equity. Now, TechCrunch comes around and asks for an interview of this startup, but only one from their startup could represent them. And Mike naturally says that he would do it. And at this point, Surya feels like Mike is taking all the credit for the company. Let's go to Alex now. So she was given 10% stake to help. From a B2C model, the startup pivoted into a B2B model. And so from VP of marketing, she then became the VP of business development, which meant that she needed to close big deals with corporates, which was just simply not what she signed up for or had skills for. She felt frustrated, unproductive, and wanted to quit. Surya gossips with Alex at some point about all his frustrations with Mike, and Alex questions if Mike should be CEO. So, how would you fix this team? And maybe before you answer that, ask, is this team even fixable? This story is unfortunately more common than rare. Many startup teams we've worked with have some version of Mike, Surya, and Alex's story. Why is it so common? Well, because people are buggy, they are complex. We're not going to pretend any of this is easy or simple. It's probably going to be the toughest thing you'll have to deal with in your startup. Look, if you're feeling it's easier to do the techie, businessy stuff than the people stuff, you are not alone. So many startup founders feel this way. So let me help you get started. There are 3 blind spots early startup teams have that keep them from doing this well. First, blinded by speed. Speed is a basic feature of a startup. Launch deadlines, sales targets, demanding investors, fierce competition. When you're under the pressure of speed, what happens is that task becomes foreground and people become background. Performance and the business become foreground while culture becomes background. And here's why it's a major blind spot, because both are important. Without the focus on task, you won't survive in the short term, and so forget about keeping people employed. But without people, you won't have a way to build the business in the long term. Both are important, and the best founders know how to balance both. Task and people will always be competing priorities, and the startups that build for the long term know how to balance them out. But why is it so easy to slip into task mode and forget about people despite it being so important? The reason is what behavioral scientists call hyperbolic discounting. It's been studied that people are biased to the present. When the rewards of something are available in the present, we value it more than when rewards are available in the future. There's a classic game they play to illustrate this point. Let me try it on you. So, would you rather have $100 today or $120 a week from now? So most people would choose $100 today. Now, would you rather have $100 a year from now or $120 a year plus 1 week from now? Here, most people would choose $120. But why? Isn't that strange? They're practically the same scenario just a year from now. Well, the reason is hyperbolic discounting. Because the benefits of focusing on people and culture are in the future, we will tend to apply a discount factor to its importance. People and culture are absolutely important. So important that it can explain your likelihood of failure and your market capitalization. To prove this, I lean on some really groundbreaking research done out of Stanford University some 10 years ago. These 2 researchers, Baron and Hannon, set out to understand how startups, caveat, mostly in Silicon Valley, managed the people aspect differently and what that meant for the success or failure of their startup. They followed some 200 tech startups across 8 years. In terms of research methods, a longitudinal type study allows you to make some interesting discoveries that laboratory studies or one-off surveys don't allow you. For instance, a lot of groundbreaking discoveries in areas like cardiovascular disease were done using this type of method. So to figure out how differently startups organize themselves, they tried to understand 3 things about a startup. 1, what they looked for when they hired. 2, why people worked at that startup. And lastly, how they coordinated and controlled the work. Why people work for your startup? Again, there were 3. 1, for the qualities of the work. They were challenged by the difficulty of the work, or passionate about the mission and the impact it could bring to an industry or to the millions of users. 2, for the team they work with. They enjoy their coworkers and draw value from associating with them. And finally, for the pay and benefits. Again, people in your startup might be there for various reasons, but likely one stands out as most prominent. Finally, how they coordinated and controlled the work. For simplicity, there were also 3. So first, autonomy. These were startups that used cultural norms as a mechanism for work to get done well. An obvious example here would be a place like Google, where the norm of being googly in itself compels people to be collaborative, ambitious, and to solve for problems they see, as opposed to wait for someone else to solve it for them. Now, quick sidebar here. This example is an oversimplification for sure. You'll never get 100% of your people to be operating in exactly the same way. Second, formal process. These startups that use well-documented processes to make sure work gets done in a specific way. Finally, direct monitoring. This is when founders and leaders use predominantly a micromanagement style. They use neither cultural norms nor processes to control. They take it upon themselves to do all the coordination and control. Now, you take these three factors and each of these three variants, and you'll have dozens of permutations. But in their research, they found that there were 5 dominant organizational blueprints, as the researchers called them. The first three, star, engineering, commitment, were generally speaking your freedom and responsibility type of cultures, where it was important to capture the hearts and minds of employees, create a mission that keeps them motivated, and trust them to operate autonomously. The last two were more of what I'd like to think of as carrot and stick type cultures. The bureaucratic and autocratic blueprints were ones where there was more of a focus on following process and doing things not for the love of the work or the team, but for the rewards. Now think of these 5 organizational blueprints. Here's where it gets really interesting. So the researchers look at their likelihood of failure. Take a look at this chart. To make sense of this chart, you need to note that the percentage of failure of the engineering blueprint is set at 0% as a reference point. Then everything to the left of 0% means less likelihood of failure, and everything to the right means more likelihood of failure. Notice how the freedom and responsibility blueprints generally have lower likelihood of failure. Again, indexed to the engineering blueprint, this next graph shows you growth in market capitalization. Notice that autocratic and bureaucratic blueprints tend to be linked to lower growth in market cap. Oh, and a nice side effect of freedom and responsibility blueprints is that you don't have to worry too much about administrative overhead. You'll free up more of your time and the time of your administrators, like people managers, finance, or HR functions. That allows you to focus on growing the startup and pursuing other opportunities. So people and culture matter. Nothing illustrates the economic value of a strong culture more than one of my favorite startups based in Indonesia, Mapan. Founded by Aldi Haryapratomo when he was in his 20s, the startup's goal had a very strong social mission to create wealth among Indonesia's poorest villages using a mix of e-commerce and fintech. The commitment to this cause was authentic to Aldi, and he was also very smart about creating organizational rituals to remind people of this goal. This is where repetition is your friend. Monday morning meetings, regular stand-ups, the office environment reminded people of this mission. He also regularly told the story of a woman that earned more for her family because of the startup's work. Aldi tells me that he is 100% convinced of the economic value of a strong culture. He tells this amazing story of one of his delivery guys bringing some merchandise on a motorbike in the middle of a storm. The customer opens her door to a delivery guy completely drenched in rain, but meanwhile her purchases were dry. How? Well, it turns out that the delivery guy had one jacket and had to choose between shielding himself or shielding the merchandise. Oh, and by the way, there wasn't a policy that said use your jacket to shield merchandise when it rains. He did it simply because it felt like the right thing to do. So what would your startup look like if you can build an environment where that kind of commitment existed? Well, to do that, you need to make sure you're not blinded by speed. So here are 3 concrete things you can do so that you focus on the people side of the business. 1, hiring is the most important thing that you do. Raise the bar with each hire and hire slowly. The hiring skill is one that you'll have to hone over time, and it truly is the most complex prediction task you'll have to do in your startup. 2, realize that the cost of a toxic employee will generally be more than the benefit of their contributions, so fire fast. Don't put off the decision because now is inconvenient to your business goals. 3, culture is defined during your crisis moments. It's not when things are going great, but it's when things aren't that you need to be extra deliberate about how you operate. It's that 1 in 10 moments when you're stressed out, sleep deprived, and nervous. Those moments are what defines you and your startup's culture. So when pressure is high, double down on how you treat your team. Second blind spot. This happens when you're blinded by the inner circle, your trusted circle. Here is a fundamental reality of the human condition. We prefer people who are more like us, more than those who are different from us. And that reality shows up in the data. Who do startup founders usually co found with? Well, it's usually people they get along with, and many of them are friends or family. And it's easy to understand why that could be the case. At a time when you have only a vision, no traction, no well reputed company, the only way you can fool someone to come along with you is if they're friends or family. They know you, you trust each other. So, in our work with these types of co founding teams, we noticed something funny. It was the siblings or the college buddies that seemed to have great rapport, but they didn't seem to have the kind of relationship that allowed them to have some really tough conversations. They would hesitate to express difficult feedback with their sister or their best friend. And if they do, it's full of so much emotional turmoil. They agonize over it, they over prepare their script, and they try to talk themselves out of it before even trying. Meanwhile, I've seen startups co-founded by professional colleagues or people who just met later on in life and decided to co-found for good reasons. They get through these conversations quite easily. So what was going on here? I thought friends and family trusted themselves more, and so surely they'd have tough conversations more regularly. Well, here's one way to think about it. When you're co-founding with family or friends, you have more to lose if the relationship goes sour. A marriage, a childhood friendship, peace during family gatherings. This phenomenon was brilliantly documented by Noam Wasserman, author of the book The Founder's Dilemma, and at that time, Harvard Business School professor. He said that business relationships tend to be less stable when co-founders were originally family and friends. Acquaintances, more stable, and even more stable are past coworkers. The principal reason has to do with the cost of having those tough conversations. The solid dark line in this chart represents the cost of the relationship, the damage incurred if the relationship blows up. And because of that cost, you have a corresponding likelihood that founders will have those sensitive discussions. Strong co-founding teams know how to hack this tendency. They're able to, firstly, talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the obvious sensitive issue that no one wants to talk about. They push themselves to call it out in ways that not just preserves the relationship, but elevates it further. If this is extra difficult to you, find someone that's equally trusted by both co-founders and ask them to help you have that conversation. There's no way you will succeed without confronting these issues, and don't put it off. Second, give each other regular quality feedback. The best way to do this is to schedule this in. Have 30 minutes each month allocated to checking in. Finally, learn how to fight well. Well before conflict arises, talk about how you would resolve conflict. To help you do these things, we have two really important tools that we've built through our work with hundreds of successful startup teams around the world. The first is a list of 25 tough questions co-founders should discuss early and often with each other. We encourage you to take a look at these questions, find the questions that you haven't yet talked about, and find time to have that discussion. This list covers a full range of things, including things like how we will spend money, to who will be the face of the company to the media, to how we would disengage from the startup if individuals aren't able to scale. The second tool is what we call the Founder's User Guide. The Founder's User Guide borrows from the idea of a user guide when buying a new piece of hardware. It tells you how to install, uninstall, and how to troubleshoot it. So this is an equivalent user guide, but for you as a founder. We recommend you download it, build yours out, and sit down with your co-founders to discuss what's in your user guide. There are 3 sections to it. 1, personal motivations. We ask you here to articulate why you're working on this startup. And if the reasons are misaligned across co-founders, what future conflicts would you anticipate? In our experience with founders, there tends to be 3 sources of motivation: the head, the heart, and the wallet. So the head, you're solving for difficult problems with elegant technical solutions, and that's what deeply motivates you. The heart, you're deeply committed to a certain group of users and care deeply about the impact the startup will have on them. And the wallet, well, this is both the financial wallet, but also the social wallet, if you will, where you feel motivated by the status, access to people, association with your startup. The second section has to do with work preferences. So what brings out the best in you, the worst in you? How would you prefer to give and receive feedback? And how to resolve conflict? The third section is about the partnership. So we ask you to be explicit about your expectations of each other and of yourself, and see if there are any gaps. It asks you to consider how fair you feel the partnership is with what you give and what you receive, with what others give and receive. Finally, it asks you to anticipate possible future scenarios where your partnership will be tested. So, one co founding team once used this to talk about an elephant in the room, that they were worried that the CEO would lose interest in the startup and look for a more stable corporate gig. They agreed to check in every 3 months on where he was on that, and they also talked about backup plans. The third blind spot, blinded by confidence. We first started thinking about this because of a founder I met in Sao Paulo. He was incredibly successful, had the backing of the world's top VCs, had a high caliber team around him, and yet somehow was not overconfident at all. This was especially interesting to me because when I turn around and work with earlier stage startup founders with not a lot of experience yet, they give you this feeling that they're absolutely crushing it all of the time. What was going on here? So I thought I'd look at the data to see if there was a pattern. In a leadership program we've built for startup founders we call Leaders Lab, we run a leadership assessment on founders, asking their employees, co-founders, and board members to rate them on certain leadership qualities. Then we ask founders to rate themselves on the same factors. What I saw in the data seemed to support my casual observations that the more effective leaders were, as determined by the people around them, the more likely the founders would rate themselves as less effective. What was going on here? I then dug into the academic literature on this and found that this phenomenon was something that's been well researched by two American social psychologists, Dunning and Kruger. It was later on labeled as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The cognitive bias where one with little experience or skill suffers from a sort of illusory superiority. And as one grows in experience, develops skill, they take a hit in their confidence. And some of that confidence is recovered at higher levels of experience and skill, but never quite returns to the high levels when one was incompetent. Well, this helps explain what Aristotle once said, the more you know you don't know. The two psychologists went on to explain that at low skill levels, one suffers from two deadly blind spots. First, you don't have the skill to avoid making mistakes. And secondly, you don't have the skill to realize that it was a mistake. And so as a result, one stays in a state of ignorance, feeling superior to others. It's important to keep yourself grounded. First, at early stages of skill, remember that you're prone to major blind spots. So it's important to find people who disagree with you and who can hold up the mirror to you. And by the way, it's unlikely you'll find that in your startup. Here's why. When you have power to hire and fire people and give them a performance rating, you step into a bubble whether you like it or not. You might think you're in touch with your team, but trust me, you're not. It's just simply the physics of human relationships. Power silences truth. So find people where you don't have a power differential and get them to disagree with you. Second, when evaluating people, don't fall into the trap of equating confidence with capability. The research just simply shows it's not the case. Finally, be kind on yourself. When you're feeling like the worst startup founder in the world, when you feel like your confidence is down, and when you feel like many others can do a much better job than you, remember, those feelings are signals of growth and that you're well on your way to getting better. To wrap us up here, as you're building your amazing product, make sure you're not blinded by speed, by the inner circle, and by confidence. Remember that people and culture are just as important as the product and your go-to-market. Remember that as you work closely with people you deeply trust, that you need to be actively wrestling with the elephant in the room. And remember that when your confidence is down, you're well on your way in becoming a better founder. Come back for more useful tools and tips at the People Lab. We're just getting started here, so please click the link to give us feedback and share the big people-related questions you might have so we can provide more material for you here. Google supports startups and entrepreneurs across 5 categories, which we call labs: technology, product, design, growth, and people labs. Make sure to engage with us across all these other startup labs. Remember to check out the additional reference material And thank you for joining us for the People Lab.